Wow, is it a thrill to be back? My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. After a week away, we are raring to go today. Now, we got to go blue background because in addition to wearing the red shirt, I'm also a little red face coming off the vacation, so you don't want to overwhelm you with the red. So we'll go blue background today. You don't care about that, but just want to give you that little bit of a logistical update off the top. Really fun show today. A lot to dive into. A lot of it centering around Jeff Sintel's reporting from the opening last week in Frisco, Texas. A former Georgia great's going to join us on the program, and we will deal with where Georgia goes from here as this summer recruiting landscape's really heating up ahead of the start of the 2019 season. We have got a lot to talk about, so let's get it going as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me just tell you this, there is no better feeling in the world than to have a great vacation, and I had a great vacation. Enjoyed my time with my family at the beach and just soaked up every moment of that. But there is no better feeling than the feeling when you come back from vacation and you get to go do a job that you love in a time of year that you love with the anticipation of what we think is going to be an unbelievable run through the fall for Georgia and then through the winter with the 2020 signing class. I just love being back here in this seat today for DawgNation Daily. I think this is going to be an incredible show and really an incredible week. And I'm going to do like two quick things off the top to kind of give you an idea of what is to come, and then we're going to dive into the show for today. At some point in time this week, I've got some major announcements that involve our next Big DawgNation Days of Summer event on Thursday, August 1st at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. I can't make those today, but I hope to be able to unveil those over the course of the next few days, and I think that's going to be really good news. We've also got a brand new content series that's going to be rolling out here at DawgNation pretty soon. I've got a very special guest helping me out with that. You're going to like that. What else? There's just a lot going on. A brand new way to interact with DawgNation content. I've got an announcement coming up on that. So really, as I get back in from vacation, it's just going to be a lot of announcements kind of rolling on through the next few days while the 2019 season is going to be the biggest yet for DawgNation. So I'm really proud of all of this and all the things we're going to be able to involve you with, and we'll do a lot of that coming up in the days ahead. Now, with all of that said, let me dive into this for today, and trying to keep up with everything that was going on last week while I was gone. A lot of this involves Jeff Sintel, his very good reporting from the opening in Frisco, Texas, the big recruiting event that goes on there each and every summer, and I was kind of left with one overall big takeaway from what I thought was maybe the most interesting story to come from Jeff thus far there at the opening. I think there is an unanswered question involving Kirby Smart. And I think if this question gets answered for the positive, then it's going to benefit Georgia's recruiting efforts for 2020, and it likely is going to benefit Georgia in its pursuit of a national championship as well. I think there are a couple things yet that we don't fully know about Kirby Smart. But the more that he answers those questions, the more that he maybe responds to a criticism, the more it sets up Georgia for recruiting success for years to come, and the national championship that Georgia fans are starving for right now, there is a chance this could also lead to that success on the field this season as well. Let me kind of explain why. Arik Gilbert, the five-star tight end, has given us an indication now for a while that, hey, he might announce in the summertime or he might wait, let it go into the season so he could see a little more of what he wants to see. Well, speaking with Jeff Sintel at the opening last week, you got the sense from Gilbert that no, now he is looking to go into September a bit. He is looking to let this thing stretch into the fall a little bit. He is looking to see if the teams that he's considering, the Georgias, the Alabamas, which he's taken an official visit to. He mentioned Texas A&M to Jeff Sintel. Obviously, there's been a lot of chatter about Tennessee. I guess Clemson is to a degree a factor there. He's looking to see how those teams involve the tight end this season. And in particular, he kind of went into more detail about specifically how he wants to see those tight ends used. And I thought he gave an interesting quote. Let me show you this on the screen if you're watching on video. And, of course, for our radio and podcast audience, I'll read this as per usual. He says about what he wants to see this season from some of these teams that he's considering. It is going to be the balls to the tight ends, but I'm also looking at the routes they run. If they run a bunch of stick routes, and I mean, I'm not really going to look in that. I'm looking for corners and some good routes. Now, a stick route is essentially just a dump down route. A tight end runs 5 yards and stop and turns and catches the football. That's essentially what a stick route is. And for Arik Gilbert, he says of someone of his athletic caliber, that's not creative enough. For someone like me who catches the ball the way that I do, and my understanding is at the opening, once again, Gilbert really proved himself to be quite a pass-catching phenomenon. For someone like that, I want a little more creative route than just 5-yard stop, turn around, and look to be dumped off the football if a wide receiver isn't open. I want to be used more creatively than that. And a lot of Georgia fans say, yeah, this is what we want to see Georgia do. Not just to impress Arik Gilbert, although that'd be a nice byproduct of all of this, but Georgia fans say we want to see our team use the tight ends that we have in much the same way. Just be more creative about getting them involved. Be more just opportunistic with the weapons that you have. And it's worth pointing out that every time this topic comes up, we're always reminded of Kirby Smart's frustration regarding all of this. You want to go back to, 2 springs ago now, Kirby Smart got very, very upset. Actually, it was one spring ago, spring of 2018. Got very, very upset about, hey, why don't you use the tight ends more? Is there a way to use the tight ends more? He's gotten really upset at that in the past, but with the Arik Gilbert stuff hanging over Georgia's head going into this season, these questions are going to be renewed once again. But here is a reminder of Kirby Smart pushing back on the idea of Georgia being more creative in how it uses its tight ends. In particular, here's Kirby.
I am so tired of the tight end questions. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't know if they've caught it more or less. The end line for me is, how many points do we score? To me, when they chart you on offense, they say, how many points do you score? So if they give us like 14 points for Isaac Nada to catch a touchdown, we'll start throwing it to him more. All right, if we get 21 points for Charlie to catch one, I promise you we'll design a play to get a 21-point play. But right now we're just trying to score points, and if that includes tight ends, that's great. Do I think our tight ends have caught more balls this spring? Probably so, because we've thrown the ball more this spring than we have in the past. But tight ends have to be a matchup disaster. Charlie had a big catch today. Isaac Nada had a big catch today. So I don't know if they're being targeted more or if they're getting open more. But a lot of it has to do with what that GPS number is, which is how fast they're running.
So I think it's really interesting. And, the overall, I think, description that you hear from Kirby Smart's words is, he would say, as long as the offense is working, then who really cares who's getting the credit, who really cares who's getting the glory, who really cares who's getting the touches. However, in 2018, there is a case to be made that maybe Georgia's offense did not work as fully as it could have. Now, overall, generally speaking, the statistics were pretty impressive, but there were a couple of areas in which the Georgia offense was kind of left lacking just a bit, and had it been a little different, then Georgia maybe could have won the national championship a season ago. If you listen to some of our podcast-only broadcasts from last week while I was on vacation, one of the subjects that came up was the piece from Bill Connelly at ESPN.com about what Georgia still has hanging over its head in terms of its pursuit of a national championship this year, and he gave a pretty staggering statistic. Let me read this to you as well. This is Bill Connelly from ESPN, who says that Georgia was 5th in overall offensive success rate a year ago and 109th in success rate inside the 10-yard line. Now, he says the new offensive coordinator, James Coley, can top his predecessor, Jim Chaney, by showing just a little bit more creativity when a touchdown is on the line. Now, when I hear more creativity inside the 10-yard line, that's where I start thinking about tight ends. That's where I start thinking about getting those guys involved in the offense. I mean, take a guy like Isaac Nada a year ago who had a lot of catches, a lot of yards. Maybe you could have found more ways to get those touchdowns for him. And this year, if you can do that, well, a guy like Arik Gilbert is going to be watching on and saying, hey, maybe that's a place where I want to play football. Now, for what it's worth, Charlie Warner, who is likely to be on the receiving end of these additional throws to tight ends, whether it be in the middle of the field or down near the 10-yard line, whatever, has said during the spring that he fully believes that the transition to the new offensive coordinator is going to open up the passing game for his position. Here's what he said about that during the spring.
I think his first instinct would be to throw. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. I can definitely see us throwing a little bit more, which I think would help us in the run game as well. Opens up the run game because they're scared of the pass. So.
Listen, I have said for a while that I don't want to see the Georgia offense greatly overhauled, and I don't want to see James Coley's play calling be dramatically different from what Jim Chaney's was, because for the most part, Chaney's offense worked. But there are a couple of ways that it could be better, not just to impress 2020 recruits, but to also lead to that championship on the field. additional offensive wrinkles, I think, are a really good way to do that. But to a certain extent, it kind of goes back to what Kirby Smart said before. A lot of this is also about the tight ends themselves getting open. Gilbert, if he one day wears a Georgia uniform, he'll bear some of that responsibility. Charlie Warner bears some of that responsibility right now, as another great tight end at Georgia, Randy McMichael, has said here on this program that it's this year, kind of in that role without Isaac Nada, that it's going to be Charlie Warner's job to step up. In fact, here's what Randy McMichael, the former great Georgia tight end, once said on our program about that very subject.
One thing I learned as a young player, I learned this from Larry Around, who played tight end before me. Yeah, everybody wants to be the one until it's time for you to be the one. And that's the one thing about losing Isaac, is that Charlie's going to have to play a much bigger role, and is he ready for it? Because it's always easy to say, well, I should be the starter, I want to be the starter. But when you get that opportunity, what are you going to do with it? I expect him to play well.
So listen, he expects Charlie Warner to play well. I think he'll play well also. And I think the more that Georgia can utilize this tight end position, the more it puts itself in a position to actually do really well on the field and impress a guy like Arik Gilbert. I mean, look at the stats. I mean, look at the way that Georgia has used Isaac Nada in some of its biggest games. Caught a touchdown pass against Auburn in the 2017 SEC Championship. Charlie Warner got 3 catches against Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl. Nada came back with a really big game, one of his biggest games against Alabama a year ago, in a game that Georgia also almost had a chance to win. Look at Alabama in its games. It's used tight ends in some of its bigger games as well. I mean, the overall bottom line on all of this is that Georgia stands at the doorstep of potentially being in the mix for one of the most unique athletes we've seen in this position in quite some time. And if it can show off an expanded offensive game plan this season, not only could it potentially impress Arik Gilbert, but it might also lead to that thing that fans really want, which is success on the field as well. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're also on the radio at noon. It's going to be back there on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, and available as a podcast wherever you find them. The Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, world-famous DawgNation.com. A lot of you just listening through the website there. No matter how it is, we're glad you're with us, and glad so many of you caught up with us last week for a couple of podcast-only episodes while I was on a video. It seems like those were well received, and I'm really glad about that. Speaking of the tight end position and kind of what Georgia needs to do more of this year and how it could impress a guy like Arik Gilbert, which Jeff Sintel wrote about at DawgNation.com, we're going to keep that conversation going in just a moment with Troy Sadowski, a guy who received All-American honors at Georgia back in 1988, playing that position, a guy who's still a big fan of the program, kind of a regular feature in some of our comment sections. Troy's going to be with us on the program here coming up in just a moment. I'm always thrilled we get a chance to talk to great former Dogs, and Troy Sadowski will be an example of that coming up today. Before that, a couple of reminders. First of all, as I said before, we are getting ready for DawgNation Days of Summer. Now, I've been telling you about this, and now this is just a fact. It's here. The VIPs are completely sold out. So here's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to see if I can get a couple of more of these added in. This is one of those things where it's not like some artificial just cutoff. There is limited space for seating. There's gifts that we kind of give to our VIPs, and there's obviously a cost associated with that. So this is one of those things that's not as easy said as done. There's maybe rooms to be had, but in terms of the VIP space, that's somewhat limited. So I'm going to see if I can get a couple more of these added, but as it stands right now, we are sold out on the VIP. So if we open this back up for more VIPs, you got to get in fast on those. You can go to DawgNation.com for more details. Now, you can still join us for DawgNation Days of Summer, and I hope that you will. We got a great golf outing on Friday that you can be a part of. We got a great event that night, Thursday, August 1st, starting at 6 p.m. That's going to be a lot of fun. But as it stands right now, our VIP situation is a bit full, so we'll hope to be able to add more of those in the days ahead. And I've got a couple of more announcements coming up about DawgNation Days of Summer that I want to tell you about, too. Also, a quick word here from Kroger. Fresh summer vibes are going on all summer long right there at your local Kroger. It's your one-stop summer shop for everything that you need, whether it's summer grilling or hanging out by the pool, the beach, even some patio furniture. You can get all of that at your local Atlanta Kroger today. All right. Before I bring on Troy Sadowski to keep the tight end conversation going, I want to go back to something else that happened at the opening last week. It was a Ohio State fan account, the best I can tell, had a video of Kendall Milton, the 5-star running back, and in the discussion, it almost seemed as if Milton let something slip. You can see if you hear this. He was asked about the potential of playing with 2 5-star running backs, being a part of a tandem of elite backs, and in the midst of that discussion, does he tip his hand that he might be playing for an SEC school? Here's what Kendall Milton said at the opening.
That's easy. We have all these little group chats and everything. So all the running backs, we all talk. I talk with almost every player. So we all talk. We try to put together these super teams. So getting 2 running backs, that's not a hard thing to do, considering that social media and everything. We all talk on the daily.
Well, would you play with another 5-star in the same class?
Oh yeah, most definitely. For me, I view it as keeping tread on your tires, because being a running back in the SEC is a tough job. So having somebody to carry the load with you, that's a good thing.
So you're going to an SEC school?
What was that?
So you're going to an SEC school?
Oh no, I don't know yet. We're gonna see what happens.
So Milton says being a running back in the SEC is a tough job. Does that mean that one of his SEC finalists is ultimately going to be his destination? I actually think the overall takeaway from that clip from Milton might be a little different than some people initially thought. I'm going to talk more about that on the show later on. I'm also going to get into some more of the other things that kind of happened at the opening from last week, kind of ahead of our conversation with Jeff Sintel on Tuesday, which I'm really looking forward to. So we'll have more on the opening here later on today here on DawgNation Daily. But for now, as I said before, always a fun thing for me to get a chance to talk to a great former Georgia Bulldog, especially a guy who's got great perspective on the current team as well. So let's keep it going here on DawgNation Daily and talk to Troy Sadowski right now. I tell you, he was a terrific member of the Dooley era, a All-American tight end at the University of Georgia in 1988, and a good friend of DawgNation Daily here now and back here on the program once again. Troy, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being with us, and we hope that you're enjoying your summer wherever it's taking you thus far.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the kind words, my friend.
Well, it's good to have you on the program here today, and I guess let me start with this. There's a discussion that goes on among Georgia fans, and when they're in the mix for a tight end like 5-star Arik Gilbert, it kind of comes up, but also with a guy like Isaac Nada, who himself was a 5-star, and Charlie Warner, who was a terrific athlete, close to a 5-star, if not quite that caliber as a recruit. There's this thing of, well, how does Georgia get tight ends more involved in the offense? And I will admit, as a guy who did not play the sport, only been a fan of the sport, there's one thing that's always been, I guess, curious to me about this. If you're an offensive play caller, if you're a head coach designing an offensive philosophy, can you target a specific position? Can you have a concerted effort to get tight ends more involved in the passing game? Or is this really about the reads that the quarterback makes while the game is going on? How easy is it to get tight ends more involved if that's truly something that Georgia wants to do?
Absolutely. I think the tight end should be involved a little bit more, but I think a lot of it has to do with the ebb and flow of the game, what's going on. I mean, back when I was playing, we were run first. That was our offense. If we didn't rush for 350 yards a game, we had a bad game. So we were a run-first offense, and we sprinkled in a little play-action pass. We took our shots down the field when we needed to, getting the running backs and the wide receivers involved in the screen games. But tight ends, they have this unique ability to play within 12, 15 yards of the ball because they have such wide bodies, and a lot of times they're physically they're a mismatch. They may be paired up with a smaller linebacker or even a safety. So being able to take advantage of those talents and abilities of the tight ends is a big part of Georgia's offense now.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this off the air before. You've mentioned to me that one of the things that you took great pride in, a little bit different than maybe the tight ends of this age, is you like those toss sweeps. As the tight end, you like setting that edge and getting a Tim Worley, a Rodney Hampton, someone like that open on a big running play. You get the sense that tight ends in this modern age don't quite take the same kind of pride in that you once did. It is a little different version of the position now, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. My daughter and I joke around all the time. She'll be doing some homework and everything, and she's got a stats class, and I'll joke around with her, and I'll say, what is 42 catches, 493 yards, 11.7 yard average, and 4 touchdowns? What does that mean to you? Those were my stats. Those weren't impressive stats. I mean, and I started for 4 years. That some guys have that in a third of a season now. But like you mentioned, we took pride, myself and Kurt Warner and Chris Broom, back in those days, the tall sweep was a big part of our offense. It was that bread and butter play for us. If we needed yardage for a first down, we ran the tall sweep. That's the way it was. We blocked that every week, every single day that we were in practice, and that's something that we really took pride in. It was just a thrill to me to look up down the field and see, Tim Worley and Rodney Hampton and Lars Tate, the back of their jerseys running for a touchdown. That was, to me, that was just the same thing, if not as good as myself catching a tight end touchdown pass.
Let me do one more thing on your position before we move on and talk about some other topics for a moment. As I talked about a good bit before you joined us, Georgia is in the mix right now for a 5-star Arik Gilbert. They're obviously in an intense competition there. A lot of other programs are making serious, pushes and pitches to him there as well. But I'm kind of interested in your perspective on an athlete like this, who I think a lot of head coaches would love to have as a defensive end because of how big he is. And yet you've also got programs like Tennessee who say, hey, you come here, you can be a wide receiver. And if he came to Georgia, he'd probably line up wide from time to time as well. I'm sure James Coley would look to use him in creative ways. What do you think when you now look here in 2019 and see a defensive end who kind of, to a certain extent, plays like a wide receiver? I mean, that's quite an athletic specimen to be, fast enough to be in the one category, big enough to be potentially in the other category. Isn't it amazing how the athletic profile of this position has evolved?
Oh, absolutely. I guess the biggest part is he might be considered a tweener. And a lot of times you see these tweeners, they just really never find a home, tight end, wide receiver, whatever it might be. I'm sure that the coaches will do their evaluations and come up with where they feel it's best for him to play. But a lot of these teams are just going to tell him what he wants to hear so they can get him on campus.
No, I think that's absolutely right, and I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think that's an issue that frankly plagues recruiting in a lot of areas and could potentially be the same with Arik Gilbert there as well. So let me turn our attention to Georgia this season. Obviously, you'd love to see Georgia do what it has not done. That's win a national championship, get back to the college football playoff, which we all enjoyed in 2017. And despite the fact that Georgia, won't necessarily be the SEC favorite or the national championship favorite, Clemson and Alabama will probably be ranked ahead of the Dogs. As you know, there is just a lot of growing expectations for Kirby Smart in year 4. What would your advice be to him about how to handle that pressure, or the players themselves who'll read a lot about themselves this summer and kind of notice the way they'll be talked about? Those expectations can kind of, to a certain extent, be almost a weight on your shoulders, I'm assuming. How would you advise the Georgia players to handle that?
I think Kirby Smart's doing the right thing. I mean, he's out there, he's recruiting, and he's controlling the in-state players like everybody has always said that he needed to do. He's doing that. He's putting together great classes year after year. These players are buying into his program, and it's exciting to see. And I think the Georgia football in the future, in the immediate future, it's going to be just that much better from year to year. You're going to see a team come together and grow, and I think that they're going to be able to routinely compete with the Ohio States, the Clemsons, the Alabamas, and I think that, with no pun intended, that tide will turn in Georgia's favor.
That's a nice thing to think about. Troy, let me finish up with this, if you don't mind. We had a brief discussion about this a couple of months ago, and I wanted to get some extended thoughts from you on this. You obviously played for Vince Dooley. You're part of Dooley's final team at the University of Georgia, and now this year on the home opener to start the year against Murray State, it's going to be kind of rechristened Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. You get the sense from talking to Coach Dooley about this that he's obviously overwhelmed by the honor and really, really proud to be remembered in this way by the university that he's grown to love. What are your thoughts about seeing Dooley's name now enshrined on this field, and kind of what it means to go back and recollect these memories from the Dooley era here in in these modern times? What does this mean personally for you?
Well, I got goosebumps after you just said that. It's exciting. It's something that is well-deserved and a long time coming. You got to understand that man put so many years of his life into Georgia football, and not just himself, also his wife. It's not easy being a coach's wife, and she has always stood by his side through thick and thin,
And the two of them together have always been an incredible team. Coach Dooley is my favorite coach that I've ever had the opportunity to play for at any level, and it is quite an honor, and I'm looking forward to that event for him. It's well done, Coach Dooley.
201 wins as a Georgia head coach, 40 years as a prominent figure around the university, and it is indeed going to be a special day on that September 7th home opener against Murray State when all this goes down. Troy Sadowski, it is a real pleasure to get a chance to talk to you here today on DawgNation Daily. We appreciate your insight on a number of subjects. As I said before, hope you enjoy the rest of your summer, and I'll look forward to hopefully catching up with you again here very soon there as well.
Fantastic. You guys, thank you for having me on. Anytime you need me, just give me a call.
Sounds good. That's Troy Sadowski there, the great former Georgia tight end. And, I love having these guys on because I do think they can give you some pretty interesting insight into kind of what's going on with the program. And you can, listen, Troy kind of comments in our Facebook comment section from time to time. That's always a lot of fun to me to get those real-time reactions to him. He mentioned another Georgia tight end, Kirk Warner. Kirk is also a sometimes commenter in our YouTube comment section. So listen, you do this show, live, and you see, these two former Georgia tight ends sometimes kind of interacting with the audience and talking with folks. That's just always a ton of fun for me, and I wanted to have Troy on the program today to get his thoughts on a number of subjects. To hear him mention the Vince Dooley thing, I think this is one of those things that we've almost kind of, the news has been out there for a little while now. We've kind of gotten used to the fact that it's going to be Dooley Field, and as you head towards the start of the fall, a lot of the attention right now is on what's actually going to happen during the season, right? The opener against Vanderbilt, kind of kicking off SEC play there in week 1, the anticipation of week 4 in Notre Dame, one of the bigger home games that Georgia's probably had in a number of years, and just kind of how Georgia matches up to the expectations that it has. That's what a lot of the chatter is about right now. To a certain extent, that September 7th deal where you bring out the Dooley family and you honor him there in that way, and you put that Dooley Field name there on Sanford Stadium, to a certain extent, that's kind of sneaking up on us a little bit right now. But I do believe that by the time we get to that weekend, I had a chance to talk to Greg McGarity about this a little bit, the Georgia athletic director, a couple of weeks ago, and they're kind of finalizing some of their plans for all this. But you get a sense for a lot of the former Letterman and sort of the inner circle there of Georgia. This is going to be a weekend's worth of activities, culminating in the big public event that takes place probably about a half an hour or so before that game, which kicks off kind of early evening, late afternoon against the Racers. You get the sense this is going to be a pretty special day, and I have a feeling that it's the kind of thing that a lot of us will have very fond memories of, those of us who are lucky enough to see it in person. So when you start thinking about things that you're excited about for the upcoming year, especially those of you who are like me, old enough to have remembered at least the late stages of the final Dooley decade there in the 80s. I kind of became a pretty big fan there mid to late 80s, so I kind of enjoyed the last little bit of the Vince Dooley era. But the stories that my grandfather and my dad all told me and all that kind of stuff, those were the kind of things as a young fan that you heard so much about. So seeing Dooley honored in this way is going to end up being a really special thing for me. I think it's something we're going to have pretty good memories of. Let me do one more thing on Arik Gilbert before we kind of shift gears and just go talk about another subject there for a moment. And we'll get more into this with Jeff Sintel when it comes up. When he comes up on the program tomorrow. I thought it was really interesting to hear Troy Sadowski just flat out say, "Hey, you got to be careful if you're a program about or if you're a player about programs kind of just telling you whatever you might want to hear. Hey, come here, you can be a wide receiver. Come here, and we'll let you line up wide on every single play. We'll throw you 100 balls." And I think the proof is in the pudding, and I think the programs that have kind of done that thing before, I think the players, whether it be Arik Gilbert or anybody else, should take time and pay attention and look to see, well, what have they done with other guys that they also told could be wide receivers? What have they done there when it comes to that kind of thing? And you'd hope that a guy like Arik Gilbert is paying close attention to that. I also saw something else from a statistical standpoint that I thought was actually pretty interesting, kind of, getting into this topic and thinking about these tight ends and paying close attention to this. One of the things that kind of surprised me, and I think for a lot of people, they don't realize that a year ago, Isaac Nauta probably had a better year catching the ball than people realized. He had 30 catches, 430 yards. He had a pretty good year catching the football. But even on a kind of yards per catch standpoint, you realize that his yards per catch a year ago was actually higher than Deebo Samuel, the South Carolina wide receiver, who came into the year, with big-time expectations, one of the top players in the league, a guy who was getting a lot of attention. Deebo Samuel was that guy. Think about how big of a deal Deebo was going to that Georgia-South Carolina game, that one-on-one matchup that DeAndre Baker got the big win in. Samuel had talked some trash. By the time the year was over, on a yards-per-catch standpoint, now Samuel had more yards because he's a wide receiver, but on a yards-per-catch standpoint, Isaac Nada had slightly more than Deebo Samuel did. So for a guy like Gilbert who wants to get more than just stick routes, more than just short dump-off routes as a tight end, Georgia can say, well, a year ago we did that. Now, it's also fair to point out that the guy that was calling those plays is now at the University of Tennessee, so that'll probably factor into the recruitment for Gilbert just a little bit. But Georgia can say, yeah, we did get a tight end more involved in creative ways a year ago. My guess is that Charlie Warner will also be one of those guys that has a chance to do a lot of that this upcoming season as well. So I think that's something really worth paying attention to. And then tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, we'll talk to Jeff Sintel about what he heard from Gilbert and kind of everything else going on there. And I know that Jeff's also got some really good stuff coming up on the website here today. More fascinating interviews that he was able to conduct last week. Noah Sewell, I believe, is already up at DawgNation.com. There's some good stuff coming up on Kendall Milton there as well. So we'll do a lot of that with Jeff tomorrow when he's on the program. For now, though, let's keep DawgNation Daily rolling here.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really good stuff there with Troy Sadowski. Great to have him on the program, and it's always a thrill to me and a real treat to have these former Dogs here, a part of our program. That's something really fun to have, and it was great to have Sadowski here today. Let me transition here, talk about the SEC Through for a moment. Before I do, let me remind you about my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. ESOG is just experts when it comes to the stuff that may be going on down your basement. Listen, sometimes we're almost afraid to go down into our basement because we're afraid of what we'll see when we get there. Has a cracked form in the foundation? Is there some damp, wet spot over in the corner? We all know what that's like, those of us who have basements. They can be kind of a source of anxiety from time to time. Well, if you're dealing with any of that, what you want to do right now is dial 678-ESOG now. That's the phone number. Dial 678-ESOG now. Engineered Solutions of Georgia has 2 full-time engineers on staff. So if you're dealing with an issue around your house, they will come up with a solution for you for it. Now, it may be a simple solution. It may not be a big fix. But if it is, you want smart people doing, and that's what ESOG gives you. So check out Engineered Solutions of Georgia by dialing 678-ESOG now. All right, one of the things that Brett McMurphy, the college football reporter, longtime reporter, he works for Stadium now, is that right? Is the name of the outlet that McMurphy works for now? Well, worked for ESPN for a million years, seemingly bouncing around a lot in the college football world. But one of the things he does is he kind of gets in touch with the folks in Las Vegas and some of the folks when it comes to those online gambling odds, and he'll kind of publish a lot of this at his Twitter feed from time to time. He has put out another collection of college football national championship odds on Twitter. I want to show you some of this. This comes from the Superbook USA there in Las Vegas. Here are the odds as it stands now as we get close to the start of the season. Alabama and Clemson both at the same odds at 9-4, which is about 4.5 to 1 if I'm doing the math correctly on that. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. It's a little bit more than 2 to 1. Excuse me, a little bit more than 2 to 1 for Alabama and Clemson to win the national championship. Georgia is just below that at 6 to 1, and then Georgia is well ahead of every other program in the country. The next closest odd: Michigan at 12 to 1, Ohio State at 14 to 1, Oklahoma at 16 to 1. And then you get into some more SEC teams there as well. But we talked about this on one of our podcast-only shows last week, that if you're a Georgia fan, you can obviously fixate a good bit on what Georgia still has to do, closing the gap with Alabama or Clemson. But at least in terms of, a lot of online, betting odds for the national championship, the Superbook USA included, the gap between Georgia and everybody else is actually greater right now than the gap between Georgia and most of the rest of the country. Let me see those odds one more time, though, on the screen, if you don't mind, though, because there's something else I want to point out here, is that when you get into that sort of next collection of odds below Oklahoma, a team that was in the playoff a year ago, you start talking about with some more of the SEC teams now. You've got LSU at 20 to 1. That's ahead of Texas at 25 to 1. Then you got Auburn at 30 to 1. Same odds as Nebraska, which seems a little bit odd to me. Then you've got Florida at 40 to 1, same as Oregon at 40 to 1. I think that collection of SEC teams there gets to be pretty interesting. And the team that's most interesting to me is probably LSU at 20-1. This is a team that I think, when you look at the way that Joe Burrow finished a year ago, when you look at the incoming freshman running backs, the return of a lot of pretty impressive pass catchers, still relatively talented on defense despite losing Greedy Williams and Devin White, I think at 20-1, LSU is one of the few teams on that list that could probably stand to be called undervalued. Watch out for the Tigers from Baton Rouge here this season. Pete Futak, who we've talked about on this show a couple times recently, was a guest as recently as a couple of weeks ago. Also made some news again. Some of the online sites were kind of making a big deal about Futak going on a radio show and saying that if Clemson were in the SEC, they'd be a little bit like Georgia. Now, the best I can tell is this was controversially received in a couple spots, but I don't understand how this is controversial. Is it a swipe at Clemson to say that they could come to the SEC and be as good as Georgia, who has won every game in its division by more than 2 touchdowns for the last 2 years, won the league 2 years ago? Somehow that's putting down Clemson by saying if they came to the SEC, they would be Georgia? I mean, it's a tired argument now to say that what Clemson gets a chance to do in the ACC is a lot easier than what it would be doing if it were playing in the SEC week after week after week. Beating Alabama one time in a national championship as easily as Clemson did it is not the same thing as going through the rigors of the SEC schedule week after week, and I don't think that's all that controversial to have to say it that way. One more SEC story that I wanted to get to here very quickly before we move on, and I get back to the Kendall Milton topic from a little earlier. I was saddened while I was on vacation last week to see the passing of Jared Lorenzen, the former Kentucky quarterback, and obviously those of us who are kind of closely follow college football kind of know what Lorenzen's story was. This was a big guy when he played, got even bigger once his playing career was done, and really battled that and fought with that. Always seemed to be a good guy, and certainly was beloved by Kentucky fans, and really, I think, very much appreciated by other SEC fans. I mean, I think part of Lorenzen's legacy as a player, for those of you who remember the sort of the hefty lefty he was kind of called, playing quarterback as a very big guy at Kentucky, he just kind of stood as a symbol of what so many of us love about the sport, which is the different ways that good players can look, right? I mean, in the NFL, pretty much every good team always looks essentially the same. They run a very similar kind of defense, a very similar kind of offense, and the NFL just kind of, you got 32 teams that look exactly the same. College football has always provided a wide array of just different-looking players and different-looking teams, and Lorenzen, as big as he was playing quarterback and really moving around as effectively as he did, he was just the perfect embodiment of what so many of us like about college football and how weird this sport can be from time to time. For the people who know Lorenzen personally will obviously miss him greatly, but his legacy as an SEC football player will be fondly remembered by many as well. And sad to hear about his passing, and we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, I want to get back to the subject at hand, and I played the audio a little earlier of an Ohio State fan site had this on Twitter. Somebody shared it with me of Kendall Milton, talking about the chance of playing with 2 5-star running backs. And he goes on to say that, hey, in the SEC, you need that extra running back to help keep the tread on your tires. And the reporter follows up and says, well, does that mean you're going to play in the SEC? And Milton says, no, I haven't made that decision yet. And, the way this was kind of shared with me on Twitter of, does this mean that Milton just tipped his hand? Does this mean that Milton really is going to go to one of these SEC schools, maybe even the University of Georgia, who has been thought to be in a good position for Milton for a while? I've told y'all that to the extent my prediction on this means anything, I do predict that Milton will play the University of Georgia. If I had to guess right now, that's what I'm going to guess. Now, we may get a chance to hear more from Milton in the next couple days here at DawgNation.com, and maybe the new quotes from him may lead me to change my opinion on that a little bit, maybe soften my stance on that I think that Milton is UGA bound. But for now, I've been saying that for quite some time based on the publicly available quotes that Milton has provided here, recently. So this quote in itself doesn't do a whole lot to change my opinion. My opinion kind of always was what it was. But does this mean that Milton accidentally let it slip? Does this mean that Milton kind of gave it all away here? I don't think that's quite the case either. Here's what I really think happened here. It's pretty clear to me that a lot of recruits, when they are interviewed, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, end up kind of parroting some of the things they have been told by coaches. And when you hear Milton talking there saying, hey, you want to play with another good running back because that helps keep treading your tire. After all, running the football in the SEC is not an easy thing to do. Listen, if you hear the same message over and over again long enough, eventually you just internalize that. And I think Milton right there just spat back out something that had been fed to him a whole bunch. And maybe that's being fed to him by Dell McGee. Maybe that's being fed to him by the Alabama coaching staff. Maybe that's being fed to him by a number of coaching staffs. But this whole notion of come here and share some carries, share the spotlight, and then be much healthier and rested when it's time for you to go to the NFL. It's pretty clear that he's been hearing that message a whole bunch, because that's what he gave back when he had a chance to talk about that the other day. I mean, I think the overall big takeaway is not if Milton let a secret slip, because I don't necessarily think that's what happened there. I think the overall big takeaway, one of the reasons why Georgia fans ought to like Kendall Milton and Georgia fans ought to have a lot of excitement about potentially seeing Milton as a part of this class, is the fact that he is so open to sharing, as I said before, not just the carries and the load, but also sharing the spotlight, because those two things go hand in hand. If you're willing to give up some carries, if you're willing to give up some time on the field, you're also potentially running the risk of giving up some glory too. And so the fact that Milton's willing to do that, I think, is the big takeaway here. He seems to be very much a running back kind of cut in the modern mold of saying, listen, it may be a Chubb Michelle situation wherever I go, where I get some of the carries and some of the attention and some of the love, but ultimately I'll be better for when it's time to move on to the NFL. And that attitude from Kendall Milton, I think, makes him a very coveted recruit. And it's easy to understand why Georgia fans want him as much as they do. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up here today, there's a lot more that kind of came from Jeff at the opening that I want to get into with him when he joins us tomorrow. I thought the honest assessment of what Carson Beck maybe did well during the Elite 11 situation, the 7-on-7 stuff, and maybe what he left people wanting to see more of. I want to get more of Jeff's thoughts on that. Solid but not spectacular sounds like the phrase that Jeff used at DawgNation.com. I want to find out more about that. Sounds like Tate Ratledge had a really good performance, even head-to-head against Brian Brzee a little bit. That's kind of interesting to see. Looks like from a measurement standpoint, Jalen Kimber made a big name for himself. So there's a lot to get into with what happened there at the opening in Frisco, Texas, and I look forward to talking to Jeff Sintel about all of that. I'm also proud to be back here and giving you one more reminder that we're still Gator hating around here, and our Gator Hater Updater, it's now been 982 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's good news. We'll see you tomorrow back here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, good to have you with us here once again for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And boy, let me tell you something. It was hot last week down in Florida where I was on vacation. Hot. And I came back to Georgia yesterday, and it was hot again. My air conditioning was working overtime. And if you're in kind of the same situation, my guess is you want to make sure that your AC is working the way that it should be. That means you want that $99 Smiley tune-up. My friends from R.S. Andrews will get your system back to factory fresh specs. But you got to give them a call or reach out to them online. It's probably the best thing to do. Online at rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. And one of their trained techs will get you cool down and feeling good in your house again. If it's just a minor, tune-up fix, they'll do that. If it's time to replace the system, they'll also give you some great options on that as well. So hope you'll check out R.S. Andrews today. All right, let me pull up the comment sections. We'll get rocking and rolling here, and then we'll probably have a nice little window of time here for some comments, especially since we haven't done that in a while. So we'll get rocking and rolling with that. Hope all of you had a great week. Appreciate you being back with us again, giving me a chance to talk some Georgia football with you. Really appreciate that. Let's go Facebook here first and see what people have going on there. And we'll look forward to getting into the conversation for the first time in a while here on Facebook. Jamie Richardson says, actually, boy, they're coming in fast. Philip Sharp says a crystal ball for Keely Ringo to the Dogs. Yeah, listen, Ringo included Georgia in his top 5 the other day. I think that's great news. If that's a guy that I assume that Georgia is sitting in a pretty good position with, it's just a matter of what else Ringo still wants to see from some of his other contenders. And, yeah, I feel pretty good about all of that. James Crump says, I can't get over Marcus Roseman. He's going to be an impact receiver. I do think that Roseme, James, is one of those guys that has sort of weirdly flown under the radar just a bit. Someone who I think got treated as a big deal because it was another head-to-head win for Georgia over Florida, and around here we love that as much as anybody does. But as I said before, you don't have to go back too far into the past, really pre-2019 recruiting cycle. This was the kind of receiver that Georgia just wasn't really winning with very much. And I'll ask Jeff about Roseme tomorrow, but it sounds like Roseme had a pretty good time out there in Frisco as well. This is a pretty good receiving prospect for Georgia to be in the mix with, to have a commitment from. It definitely stands much the same way that George Pickens did, much the same way that Dominic Blaylock did. It stands as the kind of receiver that Georgia just wasn't really winning with all that frequently before last recruiting cycle. Gene King says, BA, do you think we're getting Andrew Rame? I think it's a really tough recruitment. I think it's hard to go into Oklahoma and pull that guy out of there. I guess it's a guy that I felt better about than not, and I know that there's probably a pretty strong pull here still coming from that in-state school. Somebody on our comment section before has compared getting Rame out of Oklahoma to be a little bit like getting Clay Webb out of Alabama. That even if ultimately Georgia probably battled Clemson for Webb, maybe more so than it battled the in-state school Alabama, but going into the state where there's a kind of a dominant offensive line program already, and pulling that guy out represents a major eye-popping recruiting win. Getting Rame out of Oklahoma would be very much the same way. Sean Thomas says, any news on Zach Evans? Well, I've been kind of, out of the mix here lately, but I haven't heard anything all that much new on Evans as of late. Although I guess, did he do an Instagram Live thing the other day where he did admit finally that A&M and Texas were kind of back in his recruitment? Maybe I saw that online, which we kind of always thought anyway. I mean, at this point in time, the schools that you didn't think Evans were going to, he's not going to. Ohio State probably most chiefly in that. And the schools that you thought he might still consider, the A&Ms and the Texases, it sounds like that's very much the case there. I can also think you can see, as Georgia starts to seemingly trend for these other running backs. I'm not talking about Kendall Milton. I'm talking about some of the other backs who are out there. The more you see those stories continue to pop up, the more I think that tells you what you need to know when it comes to Georgia and Zachary Evans right now. I think a lot of this is almost like a algebraic equation that when you hear running back say, ooh, I'm interested in Georgia, and Georgia's, interested in me, the more that guy starts to feel that love, there's only so much love to go around. That means that somebody's not getting it anymore, and maybe Zachary Evans is the example of that. Ro Hawkins says, but yeah, I hope they put the toss sweep and the I formation back in the offense. Yeah, I mean, Troy Sadowski was with us before. He loved setting that edge block on that toss sweep. He took that very, very seriously. He became an All-American doing that, went on to an NFL career as well. What else is going on here? Let's see. Gerald Harmon says, who said Texas? Not sure what that's in reference to. Randy Hall says, I think Ringo's going to join the Scene and Dean show. Yeah, he may. From a personality standpoint, he'd fit in pretty well there. Joseph Kennedy says that Oklahoma is a boring state. I will say it wouldn't necessarily be my favorite one to live in. Gerald Harmon says when you talk about big-time recruiting wins, pulling George Pickens out of Alabama is going to be included in that there as well. Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. Philip Sharp says that he thinks that Rame's going to be a dog. The parents will relent. Kid wants Pit Boss as his coach. And all I'm going to say is I just think recruitments like this, I think recruitments like this are just really, really challenging. I think they're difficult. I think that Georgia still has a really good chance of winning this one. I guess I've sort of felt like they kind of always would, because I just assume that Pittman's going to get who he wants. But I think that you have to give due respect for when a family does have that in-state tie, when there is that. I mean, I'm sure they probably just grew up thinking, as soon as they realized their son was a big-time player, they probably just grew up thinking he'd eventually play for Oklahoma. When you change, the Mays family's mind about Cade Mays when it comes to Tennessee, when you change the Clay Webb family's mind that's a process. That's a difficult thing to do. And if anybody can do it, Sam Pittman can do it. But I just think it's worth pointing out just how difficult it would be to do. Let me go over here to YouTube just for a moment and see what's happening over here as well. What else is going on here? Dalton Whitaker says that Marshawn Lloyd's going to be our second running back. He let it slip in Milton's Instagram video. Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the let it slip stuff out there is kind of funny. I did hear some online chatter about Marshawn Lloyd a little bit. I think for the most part, when a weird commitment happens, if it's just too weird to be believable, the chances of it sticking are not that great. So Marshawn Lloyd to South Carolina was a really weird commitment. I'm not going to tell you that Lloyd ends up at Georgia, but I am going to tell you that I have never believed that he was likely to play at South Carolina, just given the fact that South Carolina's not good at running the ball. They're just not. And what they want to do under Brian McClendon is speed up the offense even more. That's been the big push for Muschamp. They want to play fast. Well, if you want to play really, really fast, getting much better running the ball is going to be difficult to do. Obviously, Gus Malzahn made a bit of a name for himself by having a fast-paced, run-oriented offense. But as of late, the Malzahn offense has not been exactly humming along all that well. So South Carolina has not been a good running back program. I don't anticipate it getting all that much better. And ultimately, I think that's going to be a tough task to hold on to Marshawn Lloyd. So, yeah, I think one way or another, Lloyd, I believe, is going to end up playing somewhere else. Now, whether it's Georgia or not, I guess you have to wait and see. Spencer Moore says, BA, someone needs to tell Arik Gilbert what Tennessee told Alontae Taylor. Yeah, I mean, y'all have heard me mention this a couple times, that they definitely, kind of made that push to Taylor about come here and be a wide receiver. He's been playing defensive back ever since. Assuming D'Angelo Gibbs is eligible and playing for Tennessee, I think it'll be interesting to see what position Gibbs ends up playing in Tennessee, assuming he does play for the Vols, because wasn't it another one of these cases of Gibbs went to Knoxville saying he was going to be a wide receiver, that he was changing programs and changing positions? Well, assuming he's on the Vols roster this fall, let's see what position D'Angelo Gibbs is playing there too. I think that's probably worth saying. DeAndre Borders says he's in San Diego, waking up early to listen to the podcast. DeAndre, it is great to have you. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate that. Nick BR01 also mentioned Arik Gilbert and Darnell Washington, saying they've talked about teaming up. And I did read that from Jeff at DawgNation.com while I was gone. I hate to be a downer about this. I just don't really know that's going to happen. I'm glad to know they're open to it. And it'd be an amazing recruiting win for Todd Hartley if it were to happen. And given the impact Hartley's had on that position in a relatively short period of time, I guess you would say, Hartley has a chance to make it occur. But I just think that Washington and Gilbert are so similar that are you really going to be able to pull both those guys in the same class? Because, I mean, given my understanding of what two tight end sets look like when you're in that formation, I'm not really sure you want Washington and Gilbert on the field together all that much. I could also be wrong about that. I won't pretend to be the on-field X's and O's expert on that, but given what I think I know about two tight end sets, I don't quite know that Gilbert and Washington is necessarily the perfect two tight end set, even though they are incredible athletes. Now, listen, I'd be right there with all of you. I got my Georgia shirt on today. I'd be right there with all of you celebrating if Georgia got those two, because I think they're both really unique specimens, truly unique specimens. But somehow, some way, even though they're saying now they'd be okay with playing together, I wonder if that's really going to happen. Brian Kephart says, is DawgNation coming up to Nashville for the first game or too soon to reveal the details? It's too soon to reveal them now, but we are going to have a lot of announcements about the upcoming season here very soon. Bo Mack says, why not on Washington and Gilbert? Ultimately, I think they're too similar to use together, and I think that the degree of difficulty of getting both, I think the bar is just really high on that. I think it's easier to do that with 5-star running backs than it is to do that with 5-star tight ends. Crow King 123 says, if Arik Gilbert and Darnell Washington both join UGA, I'll get a microphone and blast. I'm never going to give you up to the entire neighborhood. Yeah, listen, that'd be a worthy celebration for that. I think for sure it'd be an interesting thing to see. Lee Bridges says he's listening from the beach today. Hope you enjoyed your vacation, BA. Lee, thank you very much. I very much did. It was a great time. I just love the beach. I love being able to get away. I like being able to unplug. You know, as I said off the top of the program, I love my job. I love being here. And yet I also love that time of being completely away from work as well. I'm not one of these guys that just stays glued to my phone all the time. I kind of like to be on, and I kind of like to be off. And somehow I lost my Facebook comment. Let me get back. And it was kind of nice for a week to be off. You know, I'm talking about truly off and kind of off the grid just a bit. Still trying to keep up with some of the stuff that Jeff was writing and things like that, because Jeff was the guy really pumping out the news last week because of the opening. I was trying to keep up with a lot of that, but for the most part, if it wasn't, you know, really, really big news, I was just kind of letting it go. So it was a great time to be able to do that. And now I knew I'd feel this way as you kind of get back in the chair again and kind of get back rolling again. You really feel like you do so with the season kind of being at hand and kind of being here. So I think that's a fun feeling to return back to, and I think that's really good. John Anthony says, I ain't even worried about Milton anymore. He's all dog. And so I understand where John's coming from on that. I guess one of the things I'm always trying to be careful of is, hey, you know, has a blind spot emerged? Is there something about his recruitment that I'm not considering? Is there something about his recruitment that I'm not seeing? It could be very well said that as Milton kind of goes into the final weeks, presumably, of his decision-making process here, that he's still wrestling with his choice. Maybe he doesn't know yet, but I've been pretty clear this entire time that Milton is one of those guys who I feel the most confident about. Antoine Gray on the subject of Justin Flo. Flo is a no-go. I guess at this point in time, that probably seems about likely to me as well. I mean, I've kind of chatted Jeff about this on Before the Hedge is presented by Kroger. Jeff has not had Justin Flo in Georgia's top 10 ever. And despite the fact that Flo is probably he's top 5 prospect in the entire country, right? But he hasn't had Jeff, and Jeff hasn't had Flo in the top 10 for Georgia ever. That leads me to believe that Jeff has never really bought into the Flo Georgia thing all that much. Joel Moody checking in from Grayton Beach, Florida today. Camping vacation this week. Joel, thanks so much for sharing your vacation with us. Appreciate that. James Bryant says, BA, you didn't spend all our free Kroger cards while on vacation, did you? We need food. No, I still got those to share with all of you. I didn't take all those for myself. Maxwell Batten, apparently Matt Rugavina is in Austin. Boy, Matt travels every single day. Maxwell Batten also in Austin as well. So I appreciate all of you checking in while you're on the road here. Appreciate that. Tim Tatum says, what running back, tight end, or wide receiver wants to face the defense we have in our building? Yeah, listen, there's a lot of reasons to think that that defense that Georgia's already got on the field and working towards is going to be incredible. Travis McCullough says that Justin Sewell would be a great get, and I will admit that Sewell is one of those guys that I've had to talk myself into just a bit as a player, because at first I just thought it was too big. But then you kind of see some of the stuff from last week where he really showed off some really incredible speed. This is actually kind of an interesting prospect in that, I mean, he is big. He's what? Is he 260 pounds? Is he 260? He's a big guy, but he really runs.
He measured in at 6'2", 266 pounds in Texas last week.
But he really ran.
He moves.
He's a really interesting prospect.
I came in here today saying, BA, we need to talk more about a certain recruit, and that recruit is Sewell.
Yes, so I will tell you that he's a guy that I've had to kind of grow to like. This is the kind of thing you can do when you've recruited as well as Georgia has. Mm-hmm. By the way, Connor Riley, good to have him back with us today too. When you've recruited as well as Georgia has, you can just kind of take some flyers on some really interesting type guys. And Sewell is a very, very interesting type guy. Interesting for sure. Thank you, Travis Baltziger, for weighing in on that weight. No pun intended. Gene King says, when do you think we're going to get our next commit? I sort of get the impression now that, you know, for a while, the storyline that I was kind of paying the most attention to was how accelerated everything is. I sort of get the impression things aren't quite as accelerated as they once were, slowing down a little bit with Andrew Raym maybe. Some people may have thought he would have already announced, slowing down a little bit maybe with Kendall Milton. That was just sheer speculation, but some people thought that might happen a little sooner. It sort of seems like what at one point in time seemed like a very fast-paced 2020 recruiting cycle has kind of slowed down a little bit as of late, and that's all just me just kind of speculating out loud, just kind of throwing some guesses out there. But I sort of get the sense a little molasses has gotten mixed into the gears here a little bit. Connor, is that a fair description in your mind?
So the original plan with Raym was that he was going to commit at one of the All-American games in January. Then it came out that he was speeding his recruitment all the way up, and he was going to announce at the end of June. And now, to your point about the molasses, he has sort of targeted mid-July as when he will have a decision. I, tend to believe he does kind of want to get this over with just because he doesn't want to have this decision of, do I play for this in-state team, Oklahoma, where I was once committed, or do I go to what will probably be a better opportunity, in our opinion, at Georgia? And I think he's weighing that, and I don't think this is like one of those things that he's going to drag on forever. I do think that Georgia's next commit will, if Raym decides to go to Georgia, he will be the next commit, whenever that happens to be. There's also, we know, Kendall Milton, July 29th is when he will be announcing. So look out for those two guys this month if you're a Georgia recruiting fan.
So Philip Sharp says, Kirby orchestrates the timing of the commits all coming into the July. Here's what I believe I know, Philip, and Connor can weigh in on this too. Right now, Georgia does not know if Andrew Raym is coming or not. They may know about some other recruits one way or another. Right now, inside the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall, when Kirby Smart and Sam Pittman sit down together to share a sandwich over lunch, they don't know if Raym is coming or not. That's my personal belief. Connor, do you agree?
Mm-hmm.
You do agree?
Yeah, I think that it's not. I don't think Raym knows yet where he's going.
Yeah.
Because I think if he did know with 100% certainty, just given how his recruitment is sort of played out and he's moved his timeline around, if he knew, I think he would have announced. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, yeah. Bubba Smith says, thoughts on Tank Bigsby. I think it's a really interesting question. If we assume that the Texas schools just have a big pull for Zachary Evans and that Evans is out when it comes to Georgia, I'm not saying that's for sure true one way or another, but it just seems like there's been a little growing momentum for the in-state schools for Evans. And if Georgia's looking for that second running back, we had somebody earlier mention Marshawn Lloyd. I don't really know who I would necessarily prefer between Marshawn Lloyd and Tank Bigsby. I don't really have a strong opinion on that one way or another. But I know that, and I've said this a lot of times, a lot of our audience will be really, really glad if Bigsby ends up being that second guy because they just like running backs from Hogansville, Georgia. Given, all things being equal, they like the young man from Callaway. I don't know if all things are equal, though. I don't know that. As I said before, it's weird to think that there is debate about whether the number 50 player in the country or whatever Bigsby ranking is, it's somewhere around that top 50 range. It's weird to think that we're debating whether or not that guy is kind of, if he crosses the threshold of who ought to be able to play at Georgia. But I don't really know between he and Lloyd if those are the two running backs you might consider. Don Chaney Jr., based on Jeff Sintel's reporting last week, he's not going to be that guy. So if it's a flip from Lloyd or if it's the acquisition of Tank Bigsby, I don't yet have a strong opinion on those two backs one way or another.
Yeah, following the opening stuff with Jeff and what was going on last week from afar, it did seem like Bigsby had a good week out there. He put up a good number in the 40 that he needed to run and did show off some of his pass-catching skills in the 7-on-7 tournament. I do think a difference between Bigsby and Lloyd, Bigsby is sort of a bigger running back, and he sort of does fit more into that, Kendall Milton type role, whereas Lloyd is a little bit more of a, DeAndre Swift, James Cook type. And I do think in a truly perfect world, Georgia would have that, Nick Chubb bowling ball type and that Sony Michel one cut and gone type running back. So that is something interesting to watch, but Bigsby is a guy who I think really helped himself a lot last week. And, the longer, I think with Bigsby, the longer his recruitment goes on, I think the better the chances get that he ends up at Georgia, because we know we know Auburn wants him bad. He's been there a bunch. We know South Carolina wants him as well. I think the longer his recruitment goes on and he doesn't necessarily pick an Auburn or a South Carolina, and Georgia's options of the running back position and what they want to do become more clear, I think that helps the possibility that a lot of our readers and viewers want to see of Bigsby ending up in Georgia.
Yeah, we had that South Carolina recruiting guy on the show a couple months ago, and he said, Bigsby's been to South Carolina so much. The fact that he's just not going to commit is telling. That means he still wants to hear something. Now, the Auburn thing is more interesting in that because, Auburn, is a program of a greater stature than South Carolina is. But the fact that this, his recruitment continues to drag out, I don't mind telling you, that leads me to believe that that Bigsby wants the Georgia thing to work out. That'd be his first choice. And if you're a top-flight running back, why would it not be? Georgia's had success with running backs, and it's got a great offensive line in place. It's a better situation for running backs right now than Auburn would be. So it's easy to understand why Bigsby would feel that way. It's just a matter of, I think, with all due respect to Bigsby, what does Georgia want to do? Does Georgia have something else in mind here?
And, I think Georgia, if Evans is interested, I think you do have to play out the possibility of, trying to take his recruitment the distance and doing everything you can to land him, and knowing that there's a chance he ends up going to A&M or Texas in the end. Yeah. But that's still, he is a player of the caliber that risk is worth taking.
Yeah, but one thing you can't do is, like some people tried to do with John Emery Jr. a year ago, which is put all your eggs in the Zachary Evans basket.
Right.
And then when it doesn't work out, say, oh, well, it was going to be hard to pull a running back from Texas anyway.
No, yeah.
These are the choices you make. One way or another, the recruiting battles you choose to fight are your own choice. You can go get an easy one, or you can kind of stay in it to the end for a hard one. But if you choose to go the hard route, you don't get to say, oh, well, it was going to be hard to win anyway. Because
this is the business we chose.
Right.
This is the business. Georgia is deep sea fishing when it comes to recruits. If you want to go paddle around on a lake and catch a little 3 or 4 pound bass, go ahead. But if you want the 3,000 pound marlin, this is the stuff you have to deal with.
Stephon Salter says something interesting on Facebook. He says that Johnson and Carr just as good as Washington and Gilbert. Let me just do that part of this first. It sounds like Theo Johnson. I was looking at some of the 24/7 Sports stuff, kind of recapping the event. It sounds like Theo Johnson did make quite a name for himself last week. The Malik Carr thing. That's his name, right? Malik Carr, right?
Yeah, Malik Carr. Same high school as Dwan Mathis.
Sure thing. I won't pretend to be an expert on Carr quite as much, but we've seen the videos athletically of what Theo Johnson can do, and it does sound like last week that Johnson made a pretty big name for himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he, again, I think Georgia ends up with 2 of Gilbert, Washington, and Johnson. As of right now, I'm not sure which one that ends up being.
Am I wrong for saying that? Actually, I'm not sure I want to say this. I'm tempted to want to say a Gilbert-Johnson tandem might, to me, be a better overall situation than a Gilbert-Washington tandem. I want Gilbert to be that guy one way or another.
Yeah.
And I think that Darnell Washington in his own right is an incredible athlete. I think he's an incredible athlete. And if you couldn't get a Rick Gilbert, Washington would be a guy I'd really want Georgia to have. But I'm not quite so sure someone like Theo Johnson, who's a little bit more of a traditional tight end, at least in my mind, I'm not quite so sure that pairing him with an Arik Gilbert isn't an overall better tandem for Georgia.
With regards to Gilbert and Washington, I think if you would flip their locations to where Washington was the player from the state of Georgia and Gilbert was the one from Vegas, I don't know how much. I don't think there's a huge difference. I think maybe the reason people want Gilbert more is because he is an in-state guy, and that does sort of carry a little bit more cachet in terms of interest in recruitment. But as far as prospects, they are right there neck and neck in terms of just being true marvels at their position. There aren't a lot of guys who are as big as Washington and Gilbert are and can also move as well as Washington and Gilbert.
It sounds like, just to be candid here for a moment, that Arik Gilbert was playing on a bad 7-on-7 team at the opening and had a lot of catches. Mm-hmm. That to me does – Gilbert seems to produce wherever he goes. That event that Michael Carvel was at the other day, Gilbert had a bunch of catches there. He catches a bunch of balls for Marietta. There's a thing in the NFL draft where like one of the age-old adages is you don't want to draft wide receivers who don't catch touchdowns in college, that if you don't catch touchdowns in college, you're not going to catch them at the NFL level. I don't know if that's true high school to college or not, but Arik Gilbert catches the ball at every event he goes to. Mm-hmm. So, this idea that he's somehow only a project or the kind of guy that's going to eventually gravitate towards the defensive end spot once he gets to college, nothing about his game seems to lead you to believe that, because every event I've seen any coverage from whatsoever, Gilbert's had like 11 catches. I mean, he really catches the ball.
If Gilbert goes to Georgia, if Gilbert picks Georgia, he's going to lead Georgia tight ends in receptions this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's much of a debate.
Yeah. Crow King says, I'm growing to love Theo Johnson. Yeah, I mean, Johnson's an interesting athlete for sure. Daniel Gaskin, thank you for the kind words. Brian McPhail, thank you for the kind words. Really appreciate that. Had a great vacation, and I'm really thankful that all of you would allow me to go on the vacation. Connor, too. He was on the road last week, too, and kind of back here in the big seat today.
Matt Rugavina brings up something that I kind of want to push back on. He says these combines, opening 7-on-7 stuff are more for show as far as he's concerned. Show me their game tape. So I'm actually going to bring up Tate Ratledge here. He is someone who, goes to the Darling School. It's a 1A, single A private school up in Rome, Georgia. The fact of the matter is they don't play, that single A level. There are just not a lot of good high school football players who are going to go on to become, guys who contribute right away on Saturdays. So for Ratledge to look as well as he did against a lot of the elite defensive line prospects, Brian Brzee, Corey Foreman, B.J. Ojolari, for him to go toe-to-toe with those guys and look as good as he did, and Jeff Sentell wrote about him over the weekend along with Brzee as well, and Brzee had some nice things to say about Ratledge. I think that shows a lot for Ratledge and is a big reason why these sort of combine type settings are why Ratledge is going to end up being bumped to a 5-star.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, head-to-head wins against Brian Brzee, and apparently, according to Jeff, there were a few of those, or at least some of those. That's a pretty impressive showing for Ratledge, the kind of thing that he really can't prove in high school. As far as Joseph Kennedy, who also said that 7-on-7 is a joke, I think that 7-on-7. Obviously, I'd rather have a quarterback play well in 11-on-11 than 7-on-7, and I guess I'd feel the same way about the other positions as well. But here's the one aspect in which I don't think 7-on-7 is a joke. I mean, I do think 7-on-7 to a certain extent forces you to throw into a tight window.
Yes.
And I think 7-on-7 forces you to just kind of go man-on-man and beat somebody, either as a defensive back, keeping a wide receiver from getting inside on you, or as a wide receiver just running past someone, quarterback throwing the ball into that tight window. I think it does kind of force you to show some things. So, there is a way in 11-on-11 to have the game be easier for you. If you do have a really good offensive line, you have all these things going for you, that you may not be able to show off those same skills in 7-on-7. I mean, I kind of want a quarterback and a, offensive repertoire that can skill players that can kind of do both. I mean, I'll give you a quick example here, and I'll make this short. A million years ago, one of my first jobs I used to do sideline reporting for the Arena Football League. And Arena League is played on a 50-yard field indoors. I don't even know if the Arena League still exists, but it used to be kind of a thing. I was always amazed by the quarterbacks that did well in the Arena League, because it really is about just standing there and throwing the ball into an accurately tight window, because the field is small, right? You're playing with fewer players, and there's a million points being scored. But if you're not a super accurate quarterback, you are not going to succeed in the Arena League. If you're a quarterback who can run, that doesn't help you in the Arena League because there's nowhere to run. A lot of things that make you a good 11-on-11, 100-yard quarterback does not really work in the Arena League. I think to a certain extent, 7-on-7 is kind of the same way. It sort of tests a specific skill of, how well do you do just kind of delivering the ball in kind of a quick hit situation. And that is something that does translate a little bit to the 11-on-11 deal, although admittedly I like guys who play better on Friday nights than guys who play better on Tuesday afternoon.
Right. Well, the hard thing for Carson Beck this past week was, his 7-on-7 team, there were 5 other quarterbacks on that team. So, when he did get an opportunity to, show his stuff in pool play on Friday, I think it was Jeff had like 16 for 18, 120 yards and 4 touchdowns. But, just because there's so many other guys, there are so many other quarterbacks there and they want to rotate him in, it's hard for a guy like Beck to really get in a rhythm and really, sort of shine in a situation like that. Whereas, on a Friday night, where he's the only guy with the ball in his hands, that's a situation where Beck's probably going to do a lot better.
Well, but my understanding, though, is Beck's team this year is less talented than it was a year ago.
Yes. Oh, as far as a high school level, Beck is going to have to do a lot more this year than he did a season ago.
Yeah, so I mean, reading between the lines, and I could be wrong about this, but reading between the lines, it does not sound like Carson Beck had a great opening.
Yes, but he also did not have a bad opening. It was a B opening for Beck. I would, from my understanding.
I mean, okay,
he's not going to get bumped
fine.
up to a 5-star like we potentially thought he would, but I don't think, he lost. I still think he's going to end up being a top 5 quarterback prospect when the rankings are all said and done. James
Bryant says, dang, BA, arena football? I want to see a bio from you somewhere. In fact, bios for all of you would be a really good idea on the website. Yeah, I think that would be kind of funny as well. Listen, you got to understand something. On my way coming up in this industry of ours, I didn't turn down anything. So I did sidelines for Arena Football League games. I've done every kind of job you can imagine, and I got some stories from some of that Arena League stuff. That was a wild time. But I really enjoyed that for sure. Matt Talley also mentions, did y'all see the tweet from Kearis Jackson with Terrence Edwards? Mm-hmm. We love Terrence around here, obviously, and to see Terrence working with Kearis was a great thing to see. It sounds like Kearis is taking this offseason very seriously, and I love to see that.
I think with Kearis, it's interesting. He was someone at the start of spring practice who's getting talked up a lot. Kirby mentioned him, I believe, in his opening press conference as someone who he wanted to see a lot out of. And I just think for whatever reason, he maybe didn't have the sort of spring that the coaching staff wanted him to have, because there were certainly a lot of openings, especially in that sort of slot position, for him to really step up and take it. And now with, Dominic Blaylock coming in right away, and all indications are that he is, being the player that I certainly thought and a lot of people thought he was going to be going in there, you wonder maybe sort of, does he, fall by the wayside and fall out of a rotation? But, it's not because he's not a good player. I think it's because there are a lot of different options within Georgia that they're going to have at that position.
Yeah, along those lines, Will on YouTube says, I still have my money on Kearis as a starter. I think I would have to right now rank Blaylock and Robertson ahead of Kearis Jackson, but as Connor just said, that's not necessarily a knock on Kearis. That doesn't mean that he's somehow not as good as we thought he was or anything like that. I just think that if he is, as Will predicts, going to work his way into being one of the main 3 or 4 receivers that Georgia uses, he's going to have to beat out 2 pretty good-looking players to be able to do that. A guy like Robertson, who's played the major college level, and a guy like Blaylock, who's got a pretty impressive skill set. Kearis being a year older than Blaylock may help a little bit there. He's also, I guess, bigger than Blaylock. That may work to his advantage just a little bit. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing to watch play out. Brian McPhail mentions about the Florida situation. They've had a lot of decommits. I had a flurry of those again while I was gone. Honestly, I'm not quite sure what to make of that right now. But they've definitely had a lot of those.
I think BA is starting to get worried about his buddy Dan Mullen at Florida. BA's dream is that Dan Mullen goes 9-3 at Florida every year and he stays there, and Florida's never a real threat.
That's partially true.
But if they keep losing guys, and because this is Florida, like, you shouldn't. Dan Mullen, this isn't Mississippi State where you maybe have to try and take some guys who might not qualify because they are that talented. That shouldn't be the case at Florida. You should be getting the best of the best, especially in that state. And the fact that they're not is worrying. And if that trend continues and he's not recruiting well, and they start losing a few more games here or there, that stuff catches up to you quickly. We saw that literal exact same thing sort of happen with McElwain, where he goes 9-3 or 10-2 his first 2 years, and then things sort of go sideways on him because he wasn't getting a whole lot of talented players early on, and it went sideways real quick. And I think, with Mullen, that could almost certainly be a case.
Santiago Diarn on Facebook says he loves to see what Florida's going through right now. And I understand that, Santiago, but Connor's right. I've talked about this before. I do not want Dan Mullen to get fired from that job. I do not, because the next coach they hire, they're not making the same mistake 3 coaches in a row. McElwain was not a good recruiter. Thus far, they've replaced him with a coach that's not recruiting at the high caliber either. Listen, Florida's one of those programs that's dumb but not stupid. They are not going to hire another guy who's awkward with recruits and not able to rebuild those recruiting, situations. Look at what a guy like Manny Diaz is going to do at Miami, for instance. Here now, I'm sure that's a pretty tough sell right now for a lot of reasons. That's a program that's going to bend through a lot, but that's the kind of guy who eventually I think is going to try to recruit Miami the way they're used to being recruited. I just don't think that that if Florida were to be bad enough under Mullen where they're looking to make a change, I don't think they're making the same mistake 3 coaches in a row. So I do root for Mullen somehow to stick around that job. And I don't root for him to win all that much, but I don't root for him to go 0-12 either, because I don't want to see what Florida might hire in that situation if they are looking to
I
replace
think Florida
somebody.
was really spooked by how things went with Muschamp,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that they hired a first-time head coach who had a defensive background, who was really good at recruiting, and the two head coaching hires they've made since they moved on from Muschamp really aren't that at all. And so I think with that they're probably whenever they move on from Mullen, they're probably going to look themselves in the mirror and have to say, all right, we're going to need to start landing ace recruiters, big time recruiters that can, bring in top talent, because I think it's a lot easier to, I think it's an easier sell as a program that you're on the up and up if you're turning high 4-star guys into 5-star production than turning 3-star guys into guys who produce at sort of a 5-star level.
Here's the other thing. I really think that we've I think the Florida criticism for this year has actually kind of jumped the shark just a little bit. Because even with the decommitments that Florida's had, they're still rated in the top 10, I think, for the 24/7 composite. I think they're number 9, I think. I may be wrong about that, but I believe they're still in the top 10 of the 24/7 composite. So, the other day I was looking at some of the over-under stuff where you can bet, does the team have more or fewer wins than what the Vegas line is. Florida's at 9, but there's juice on the under right now, which means if the line were to move, it'd be more likely to move to 8.5 than it would be to 9.5. So it's almost like we've gone from, hey, Florida's a real threat to Georgia in the SEC East to, hey, maybe Florida's only going to win 8 or 9 games. And that's what I think the accurate truth is. But I feel like the more the public moves in that direction, the more of a potential nobody believes in us type advantage it maybe gives Florida. So I definitely think the Florida criticism, as much as it pains me to say this, I kind of think it's gotten to be a little too much as of late.
Yeah, I think early on you were someone who, early on in this offseason, when a lot of people were talking up Florida, you're like, hey, let's slow down here. And I think you were in the boat that Florida's going to be overrated going into the season, so much that you said, Florida, they're going to be ranked in the top 10 to start the season. You think, and you've said, you're stuck to it, that they're going to be a team that ends up
I don't think they finish in the top 25.
Outside the top 25.
Yeah, I mean, virtually every year, there's a top 10 rated preseason team that finishes outside the top 25. I think Florida's the best chance of having that happen. But the more people start standing on that street corner with me, the less good I feel about my prediction.
Yeah.
By the way, I think tomorrow I've got a big prediction I'm going to unload.
Are we going to get an actual bold prediction?
Yeah. If you listen to one of our podcasts, we did almost bold predictions. Predictions that I wanted to make, but not quite aggressive enough to be able to make. I've got one that's pretty aggressive. It doesn't involve Georgia, although it could potentially impact Georgia. I'm going to make that tomorrow. I think I'm going to make that tomorrow.
That is what we call a tease.
That is. That's exactly right. All right, we got to get ready to go here. Does anybody else have anything they want to say in the comment section on either side, Facebook or YouTube? Stephen Wainwright says their number 9 rated class for 2019 has lost 5 players from the class. So listen, obviously I enjoy it. I'll just leave it at that. Obviously I enjoy seeing what's going on with Florida. I do. I very much enjoy it. Kenneth Wiggins on the subject of Brent Venables for being a really good defensive coordinator. I mean, I think that Venables is going to have a lot of pressure on him for Clemson this year, because regenerating what that defensive front did a year ago is going to be a requirement for Clemson to win the national championship. Now, the thing is, they got the talent to be able to do it, at least on those kind of outside edge pass rushing situations. But yeah, I think there's a lot of attention on Clemson this year. I want to see Kathy Aquavia Green's top 4. I got to try to open this.
I don't know if it was you or a commenter who mentioned some names that could come up if they want to move on from Dan Mullen. I think if Jeff Collins kind of rights the ship a little bit at Georgia Tech, he's going to be an option there because he's got some history there.
I would put Mario Cristobal. Yeah,
Cristobal is going to be a big name given his recruiting ties to the state, and he's a really good recruiter out of there.
And Oregon's just not doing anything. Oregon's not going anywhere.
Well, no, I think they got a shot to win the Pac-12 this year, and maybe even make the playoffs.
I don't think so. I think for whatever reason the Nike juice from that program just seems to be gone.
Well, I think Chip Kelly's unfortunately his reputation, rightfully so, is taking a hit. But when Chip Kelly had it rolling, you could have made an argument he was the best coach in college football. He may not have won the championships that Saban did, but in terms of maybe a one-game X's and O's guy, in terms of doing what he did, I don't know if there was anyone better than that. And you see Oregon's probably been a little overrated and a little overvalued just because of what Kelly was able to do in his short time in Oregon.
Kathy Aquavia Green says, top 4, Clemson, Bama, UGA, Oklahoma. Of those 4, which is the most likely to miss the playoff? Good top 4, Kathy.
Good. I don't think it's going to be the top 4 we're going to
I don't think it's the top 4 either, but I think it's a good top 4 to start with.
This is a really good discussion.
Which of those is the most likely to miss the playoff?
Alabama.
I think so, too.
Even though they are not the least talented of those 4 teams, I think that's Oklahoma. My question with Oklahoma is I don't know who beats them in the Big 12.
Mm-hmm.
Texas is someone who a lot of the analytics say is doing for major regression.
Analytics do not like Texas.
And I believe you were making this point a year ago, how you didn't even before how close that Georgia-Alabama game was, you didn't think we were going to see 2 SEC teams in the playoff again. I still don't think we're going to, unless they're both 12-0 and it's so obvious that those are the best 2 teams. I think, unless it's a rare circumstance, if Georgia and Alabama meet in an SEC championship game, the loser of that game is going to be out. And I think Georgia, right now on a neutral field, I would take Georgia over Alabama.
So I'm going to go ahead and give away my big prediction for tomorrow, and I'll do it on the show for everybody else. I'm taking LSU to win the West.
You're taking LSU?
Taking LSU to win the West. I don't know that necessarily means I think LSU beats Alabama head-to-head. I think we may see like a 3-way tie thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think at Auburn to end the season's a tricky spot for Alabama. I think it's a really tricky spot. The closer
what happens if Tua gets hurt?
Yeah, the closer we get to the start of the year, I just think that here's what I think. I think you've got a very interesting scenario in the SEC West, where I think you've got 3 teams who I think are actually is it 3 teams? Yeah, 3 teams who I think are no, it's 4 teams. It's 4 teams who I think are really pretty good on paper. Auburn, A&M, LSU, and Alabama. Now, you'd say, well, they all 4 can't be really, really good, and that's probably true to a certain extent. But I think the bottom part of the SEC West is going to be pretty soft. I think that Arkansas is better than some people think. They may actually be kind of an interesting play on the over at about 5.5. But I think that Mississippi and Mississippi State are both really bad this year. I just think they're going to both be really bad. I think that for a lot of the same reasons people don't like, Texas, teams like that, I think it's going to be very hard for Mississippi State to replicate what it lost. I think Ole Miss is just not good. So I think a lot of SEC West teams will feast on those 2 Mississippi schools. I think the Auburn's a really tough out, especially playing at home. And the one thing I just think about LSU is I just think they're going to be way better offensively than a lot of people realize. If you look at the way that Joe Burrow played last year in games that kind of mattered, he was good. In November, Joe Burrow was good. He was good in the bowl game against UCF. They had something to play for. I think Georgia losing John Emery Jr. is a really disappointing recruiting loss. I think he's going to be a household name. And Ty Davis may be the other freshman running back. He may kind of be as well. But if you give a good running game to an experienced quarterback and a very talented crop of wide receivers, I just think it sets up for LSU to be the most undervalued, underrated team in the country right now, and the kind of team worth taking a flyer on to win the division. Maybe in like a 3-way tie because Alabama loses to Auburn or something along those lines. Maybe they beat Alabama head-to-head. But I said this during the regular show, at 30-1 to win the national championship, they're completely underrated. As kind of an afterthought in the SEC pecking order, completely underrated. I think LSU is among the national elite.
I'm not willing to go to the national elite part, and I actually think a bolder prediction, which your prediction is bold, do not get me wrong. A bolder prediction would be that LSU would beat Alabama this year, but LSU's SEC schedule sets up very favorably from them. From the East this year, in addition to getting Florida, they get Vanderbilt early in the season when Vanderbilt's probably not going to be all that good. Even if they are at Vanderbilt, they get, they're the big toss-up games that you kind of just referenced. While they do have to go to Alabama, and that's, in my opinion, certainly going to be a loss, and in all reality, probably should be. They get Florida at home, they get Auburn at home, and they get Texas A&M at home. And that schedule, that schedule quirk really is, I think, going to help them out a lot. Get them, to a 10-2 mark this season.
Yeah, I think that's. I think it's going to be a fun conversation to continue to have. Dennis Wilson on YouTube says that Miami is the most underrated team in the country. Dennis, I've told you this before. Now, for those of you who watch on Facebook, Dennis is our resident Miami fan in the YouTube comment section. You've got one job. You've got a big game to win for me. Is August 24th? Is that the date?
Yep.
You got a big game to win for me on the 24th. And if you win that, then honestly, we may just let you dominate the comment section for a day on that Monday coming back after that. We may just give you the whole thing to talk about whatever you want to talk about. But don't give me underrated team. Don't give me any of that kind of stuff until you go get that job done in Orlando on the 24th. After that, we'll talk about whatever you want to.
Yep.
We'll talk about whatever you want to. All right, we got to get ready to go. What else? Anything else? Final thought, Connor?
Check out Jeff Sentell's interview with Noah Sewell. It's up on the site right now. He's a guy who I like a lot, and I would very much like to see Georgia land, given, they just don't make football players like him. 6'2", 265 pounds. Incredible bloodlines. His brother's a starting left tackle at Oregon. He's got another brother at Utah and another at Nevada. I am someone who, I do think there's something to coming from good bloodlines and having siblings siblings and parents who excel at that sport. And I think he's a guy who Georgia really should make an effort to really go out and try and land. Given how talented this Georgia linebacker room is, they don't have a guy like Sewell on the roster, and I think that's sort of the thing. As Georgia, hits its head on how truly talented this roster could be, those sort of quirky guys that they just aren't a lot of can really make a difference for you at the highest level.
Let me finish on a serious note for a second, if you don't mind. I'm from Hall County, and there's some serious stuff going on in my kind of hometown, home community. A Hall County deputy was killed, and there's some suspects apparently still on the run. AJC.com's got you covered on that, so check out AJC.com for your Atlanta news now to stay up to date on that. There was also another drowning in Lake Lanier over the 4th of July week. Just a very crowded lake that's had a lot of very serious situations. There's more coverage of that at AJC.com as well. So my home community impacted by a couple things here. An ongoing story involving a deputy who's apparently been killed, and more kind of just sad news coming out of Lake Lanier there as well. So stay up to date on the Atlanta news at AJC.com, and obviously prayers to Hall County Sheriff's Department. I have a lot of friends that have worked for that department, and they have kept my extended family safe for a number of years, and so very sad to hear but the latest news there, and you can check more about that at AJC.com. Also, huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Check them out at rsandrews.com. We'll be back here tomorrow, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily once again, and a lot more stuff on what is going to be a pretty busy recruiting cycle that kind of tides us over for the start of the upcoming season. SEC Media Days next week. So there's a lot going on, and we're glad you're part of it. See you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily.